Are we denying self? Are we being bold? Are we showing faith? Are we telling people the solution to their problem? This is going to be kind of the way we focus in on these characters this evening. So the title of this class, you could say, is Deny Self and Defy Expectations. So would you say, from what we've seen, did this little girl deny self? Did she defy expectations, the world's expectations? Did she go above and beyond what the world would expect and some in the church would expect of the average Christian? I think so. I think you could say that she denied herself and defied expectations. All right, let's look at the next character. Before we get any further, when am I supposed to stop? 8 o'clock? Okay. All right, we got to go. All right. Let's read verses 4 through 5, and we'll focus in on the next character. Naaman went in and told his master, saying, "Thus and thus spoke the girl who is from the land of Israel." Then the king of Aram said, "Go now, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel." He departed and took with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 changes of clothes. We'll look at the king of Syria, the king of Aram, very briefly. What's something that jumps out at y'all about this man?
He didn't have to think long about Naaman's request.
Right?
What Naaman even requested. He said, just go and get healed.
Okay, so what would that tell us about Naaman?
That he's trusted.
Okay, he's trusted, he's valuable to the king. And the king honors people like that. What else? Okay, yeah. So that shows some humility. What was the king of Aram willing to do? Okay. To who? Who did he send money to? Okay. King of Israel. Yep. The kingdom that he just conquered, the kingdom that he just defeated. Do you think that they have the best relationship? Probably not. Are we willing to humble ourselves, to align ourselves with an enemy in order to help someone? Are we willing to deny ourselves and defy the world's expectations and do that? We see the king of Aram was willing to swallow his pride, and seek someone who probably wasn't going to be very receptive to him and seek his help. So would you say that the king of Aram defied expectations? I think by the world's standards, you could say that he defied expectations. I think you could say he denied self. So, all right, let's look at the king of Israel, verses 6 through 7. He brought the letter to the king of Israel, saying, "And now as this letter comes to you, behold, I have sent Naaman my servant to you, that you may cure him of his leprosy." When the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes and said, "Am I God to kill and to make alive, that this man is sending word to me to cure a man of his leprosy? But consider now and see how he is seeking a quarrel against me." What about the king of Israel?
The king of Israel was not able to cure leprosy, and he thought the king of Syria picked a fight with something.
Okay. Yep. What does he do in the process of that? Who does he put the emphasis on? Himself. Does he put it on God? He said, am I God to do this? Who does he focus on? He focuses on me, 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 me. How can I fix this situation? How many times do we do that? We approach a tough situation, we never think about God's ability in this situation. How can I fix this situation? What else do we see that the king of Israel does? Okay, so what does he assume? Okay, did King of Aram have good motives? So the king of Aram, the king of Israel, assumed his motives. What's the quickest way to make a fool of yourself? It's to assume someone's motives. That's exactly what he does. Do we have enemies, people that we don't like in our life? Do we have spouses? Do we have children? And we assume their motives? We cannot assume anyone's motives, and we see King of Israel making a fool of himself. Also, do we look for God's opinion in tough situations? Do we only focus on how we can make this situation better? So based on what we've seen, did the king of Israel deny self? No. Did the king of Israel fit right in to the expectations the world has for people? I think he met those expectations great. I think he did great on that. We have to deny self and defy the world's expectations.
Even so, he didn't even mention what Naaman had took with him. The 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 changes of clothes, and 10 talents of silver.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
not even mentioned.
Yeah.
And it's automatically, he's picking a fight with me.
Yeah. Can an enemy do something good for us and, oh, he's trying to pick a fight again? Cannot assume people's motives. Got to defy expectations. All right, let's look at Elisha. Verse 8. It happened when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, that he sent word to the king, saying, "Why have you torn your clothes? Now let him come to me, and he shall know that there is a prophet in Israel." What about Elisha?
He's a prophet, a man of God, and he acted as such.
Okay. What did he see the opportunity to do? Okay. He saw an opportunity to give glory to God. Are we looking for those situations? Now we're not told if Elisha was told by God to contact the king of Israel. But let's just make an assumption. Did Elisha have to do this? Did he have to try to help the king of Israel, the king that he didn't have the best relationship with? Right. But he saw an opportunity to bring glory to God. Are we willing to do that with an enemy? Someone we don't like? Are we looking for those situations? Are we looking for those opportunities to bring glory to God? What did we look at with the servant girl? Keep your head down, stay quiet, do your job. Could Elisha have stayed quiet? We'll just let this king tie himself in a knot. But no, he saw an opportunity to bring glory to God by helping someone that wasn't on God's side, by helping someone that didn't necessarily like them. So would you say that Elisha denied self? Would you say that he defied the world's expectations? I think you could say so. All right, let's look at Naaman. Starting in verse 9. So Naaman came with his horses and his chariots and stood at the doorway of the house of Elisha. Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, "Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh will be restored to you, and you will be clean." But Naaman was furious and went away and said, "Behold, I thought, he will surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God and wave his hand over the place and cure the leper. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean?" So he returned and went away in a rage. What about Naaman?
Naaman's pride got in his way that he would not accept cleansing on account of it. Behold, I thought, got him in trouble, and it gets us in a lot of trouble today.
Right.
We make judgments before we hear the whole message.
Yeah? Did Naaman get to choose the river? Do we sometimes approach God with our expectations? Do we get upset with God when he doesn't meet our standards of how a situation should be dealt with? We see Naaman approaching God with his standards.
You also see his attitude of the Jordan River.
Right.
He looks down on the waters of Israel
Right.
and looks up to the rivers of Damascus. And, he didn't get to choose the mode of his cleansing. So whatever
Yep.
it was, he thought it was going to be, God's going to wave a hand at me and I'm going to be okay. But that wasn't it.
Right. I mean, we can see kind of the source of this attitude. We see Naaman was captain of the army, highly respected, a great man with his master, a valiant warrior. But what? But he was a leper.
And he still looked down on the people of Israel and their waters. So,
Yep. We might be a preacher for 50 years. We might be an elder that served at the same congregation for an extremely long time. We might be the hardest working Christian in the church, but we are sinners. We sin. We fall short of God. But Christ. Because of Christ's blood, because of God's avenue for our salvation, we can be cleansed. Naaman doesn't get to choose the river. We don't get to choose the way we're saved. We don't get to approach God with our expectations. God has given us his expectations, and it's our job to meet them. So who changed? Did God change or did Naaman change? Naaman changed. Are we ever going to change God's way of salvation by what we want, by what pleases us? Who has to change? I have to change. Are we willing to leave our pride at the door, humble ourselves, and accept God's way of salvation? And I'm not just talking about baptism. I think it's comfortable to leave it at baptism. What about everyone in this room that's been baptized? Are we still approaching God with our expectations? I'll live this Christian life as long as it meets my standards, as long as it meets my way of life. I'll still listen to that same music. I'll still watch those same shows. I'll still go to those same websites as long as it meets my expectations. Are we still looking for God's standard, for God's direction? Are we still approaching God with our expectations? Are we still trying to choose that river? We may have accepted God's river of baptism. What about the other rivers? What about complete holiness in our lives, complete sanctification? What about telling others about their problem of spiritual leprosy? Are we denying self, and are we defying expectations? Now, we're all familiar with Naaman's change of heart, but as of right now, did Naaman deny self? As of right now, no. Thankfully, later, yes. Did he fit right in with the world's expectations? As of right now, yes. He has fit in with the expectations. Let's look at Naaman's servants, verses 13 through 14. Then his servants came near and spoke to him and said, "My father, had the prophet told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more then when he says to you, 'Wash and be clean'?" So he went down and dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the word of the man of God, and his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. What about Naaman's servants?
They cared for him, and even, I don't know about you, but I don't want to go to my boss when he's in a rage.
Yep.
So, similar courage as well.
Yep, I think that's the key. Naaman turned and went in a rage. The master that could have their head on a silver platter, the master that could make them lose their job, make their life miserable. But why'd they do it? Why did they approach Naaman about his problem of leprosy and pride?
Well, that's the same way that we're trying to teach someone. The way we approach it has a lot to do with whether we're able to convert them. We cannot approach it in a rage or in a way that's going to drive them away. We have to approach it in a way they will accept and talk to us about.
Right. Yep. I think it shows a lot about their character, about them believing Elisha's servant, and I think it would defy the world's expectations. Would it have just been easier to be quiet? You know, we've looked at this concept quite a bit this evening. This idea of staying quiet. This man, he could honestly kill you. Stay quiet. Why didn't they? Because they were denying self. They were defying expectations. Are we willing to tell someone who could ruin our life, who could destroy everything we've worked so hard for, about their spiritual problem of leprosy? Are we willing to deny self? Are we willing to defy expectations? Right. Yeah. What were you saying?
Obviously, afterwards, after they did take him down and everything, Naaman was, like wanting to give the servants, things and to give offerings, stuff. Yeah, give them stuff like gold, clothes, and all that stuff. So, I mean, there had been something that, the servants saw something in me.
Right. And we can see threads of humility in Naaman by listening to a little servant girl from a land that he just conquered, by listening to servants that were under him. We can see these threads of humility in Naaman's life. And thankfully, Naaman did humble himself and follow God's solution to his problem.
And the servants kept it simple. They just repeated what he told them to do. Just go ahead.
Right.
That's it.
How many times do we complicate this? Well, you got to have this concordance. You got to have this Bible study material. You got to have this pamphlet. Just repeat what this says. Now, all these things are fine and good, and they can help us be more effective in studying the Bible with people. But if that's keeping us away from doing those things, just repeat what the Master said. Satan wants us to complicate things. He wants us to think that we're not good enough, that we're inadequate. Just repeat what the Master says. Now finally, let's look at verse 14. So he went down and dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the word of the man of God, and his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. What happened?
You obeyed and he was clean.
Okay. So after Naaman's pride got in the way of him obeying God's command, how did God show his grace? He still had that avenue there. That avenue was still accessible to him. So that means that when we let our pride get in the way of obeying this, of obeying God, this doesn't change. As long as we're able, God's way of salvation is always accessible to us. It will always be there, as long as our hearts are right, as long as we deny self and defy expectations. Thank y'all.